Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining in this morning. It's a beautiful day outside, at least where I am in California. So how's everyone doing with the lessons this week? Just say hello in the chat box if you're here, and let me know if the sound is coming through okay, just in case. Hi, Kathy. Oh, it's raining up there. We're supposed to get rain tomorrow, and it's really weird because today it's like clear blue sky and it's supposed to be like 85, and then tomorrow it's supposed to drop for us to like 58, which is pretty cold for this time of the year, and rain. So it's like night and day. Where I live, the weather is pretty unpredictable. We've had a lot of rain though in California, more than, I think it's a record year for us. So the weather's been definitely a little bit weird, but we've needed it in California. We've been in such a long drought, especially where I live. It's a lot of farmland, and so everyone, all the farmers are really happy to have more rain. Our mountains are covered in snow and everything too, so that's good. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in since you're here, Kathy. Let's jump in with your painting. Um, Hi, Linda. I'm glad you're enjoying the instructional videos. You're probably showing up as Rick. It depends on if you're logged into your which Google account you're logged into. So if you're logged into like a Gmail, it's linked to YouTube. So if your husband's Gmail is logged in and you come over to YouTube, that's probably why. But it's no big deal. I know who you are. um, okay, so I released today's lesson yesterday, actually, just late last night. So I don't know if any of you have watched it, but and those of you who are following me on Instagram probably saw me post a couple of close-up details. So along with this week's video, check the download section because I included some close-ups and high-res shots of the colors. Because sometimes in the video, I noticed that the video looked slightly warmer than the painting feels in real life, not by very much. And the pictures I took felt slightly cooler. And that's something we've kind of talked about with trying to capture your work as accurately as possible. I take my painting into two different lighting situations and it looks slightly different. So, always when I'm talking about your color, if things look really off to you in the photograph as they appear on the screen, just let me know. And just we'll try and get it as close as possible. That's just the only downside, I guess, to working long distance. Another thing is it depends on the monitor that you're watching the videos on. So if you're having trouble seeing some of the colors maybe I'm talking about, try watching it on a different monitor or like on your phone or on a tablet. And sometimes I know with like Apple products, they tend to emphasize like the cools, but you might look at, even the difference between like an iMac and a tablet. It can look slightly different depending on what device you're watching on. So just keep that in mind as you're watching the videos. But just in case, I also provided really close-up details of my painting so that you guys could see a little bit more clearly some of those nuanced differences between my highlight colors, because it's, a video camera has a hard time picking them up because they're so bright. But with the photo, I can control the exposure and bring it down just a little bit so that you can see the pink, yellow, and blue as they play together. And I also included a photo of my palette colors, just a little snapshot, so that you guys can see a little bit more closely what I'm using. So I just wanted to throw that out there to make sure you check that download section and download those high-res pictures. So, Kathy, don't worry about being far behind. Everyone's kind of at a different stage, and that's okay, because kind of from here forward, like I said, we're just building a few detail layers. Everyone's piece is going to require something different depending on how your first color pass went. Some of you will have more revisions to make. You might be correcting drawing errors. This is just part of painting. Not to mention everyone has lives outside of the class, and sometimes it interferes, and that's okay. I'm completely understanding of that, so don't feel bad. You have, like, our class, I think our final critique falls on the 15th next month. Let me double check on my calendar. Sorry, 18th of wait, no 15th. Sorry, I was looking at May. Okay, so June 15th is our final critique, and that's where you guys should receive your final lesson on the 8th, and then you'll have an extra week after that to kind of catch up and get your painting as far along as possible. So don't stress. Just take your time. You have several weeks to kind of catch up and continue building your painting layers, and we'll do critiques every single week until the end, so that I can help you guys, at each stage that you're at. So it's okay if you're just now finishing your first color pass. Don't stress about it. It's better if you take your time with that first color pass. I know I've mentioned this before, because the more time you kind of take with it, the less work you're going to have to redo, in the second and third layers. So, and a lot of what I'm doing, is you'll see in today's lesson, is really just further refinement. And you don't want to put those details on until you're happy with that first, the major forms, which is what you guys are kind of working on right now. You don't want to put on the eyelashes until you're happy with the eye shape and the colors and, the forms. So if that means you have to repaint them a couple of times, those general forms, then that's okay. Just get it to where you're pretty happy with it before you move forward with those real tiny, tiny details. All right, so Kathy, let's go ahead and get started here. I think your painting's looking fantastic. There's a few things you were saying with the color. You don't feel like it's showing up as much. So what was your exact question? I think you've captured her skin tones overall. I think really from here forward it will be a matter of kind of tweaking a few of those. I think her lips could maybe be softer in a few areas, so we'll talk a little bit about that. But what was your specific question on as your piece sits right now? Hello, Joyce. Welcome. While I'm waiting for you to answer, I'm going to just get my brushes ready here. So what I'm seeing, just in general, I'm going to mostly having more reds and blues in the skin tone. Okay, so there's a few areas where I think you can start to enhance some of those variety of colors. Now you do have a warm light situation, whereas I'm working with a cool light. So your highlights are going to be more dominant yellow or kind of pink. But like, so if we kind of zoom in here on the reference, you can kind of see here, if we take that very, very bright highlight. Well, actually, let's even take the highlight here right on the tip of the nose. So if we look at that, that's a pretty bright peach tone. And if we take just an example, the shadow, you can see it's kind of like this muted gray violet. And that's because you kind of have this oranger light coming in. So just keep that in mind. I think you captured that overall. I feel like your color here, you're pretty close. You might be just a slight bit more red. So if you wanted to, you could start to push that slightly. But where I think you could enhance actually some of those more cool halftones that can help, we almost need, the way I like to think about color is, it's all kind of relative to what you put around it. So if you paint an orange only with orange colors and you never put any of that complement in there, or you don't find any cool relative colors, then it's just going to feel kind of monochromatic. So the same goes for skin tones. And you do have that really warm overall color. So I think what will help that warmth kind of be emphasized a little bit more and complemented a little bit more is by adding some of those, finding those cool areas and adding those in very intentionally. So one area where I really see a lot of cool tones, and they're pretty dark, but it's right around her eyes. You can kind of see, like when I look, hover over, she has kind of these, you have like a pinker tone, and you also have kind of a blue or gray, kind of violet. And if you look over here, and part of this is her makeup, but it actually works in our favor here, because these are kind of mauve tones, which are complementary to even that dark there. They're complementary to the orange in her skin tones. Another area you always find cool tones is in this little transition along the nose. It's usually the hollow bridge of the nose, and you'll notice that they're relatively warm colors, but you will find areas like, see how in here, like in this section through here, it kind of picks up this blue-gray. So I think you could enhance that in your painting a little bit and make it maybe a little darker on that inner corner. Another area where I see a lot of that gray is right in here. You can see that color goes from being a very warm, kind of saturated peach tone right there to being the same value almost. It goes slightly darker, but see how it goes more blue? So if you just took a little bit more of a gray and use that just along the edge, it's usually what you're seeing here is this plane change between her cheekbone that comes, you have this form that comes in and overlaps, and then you have the jaw coming in the back. So you'll notice that right after that cheekbone section, it goes from being a very warm color to being a cool color. And part of the reason we have that is because we tend to have a lot of peach fuzz right there. And so the light's catching that and it's cooling. So that's why we get cooler zones through here. Generally along the jawline, you can see it gets cooler as it moves down. So that's something I think would help in your painting. I can see that you have some of that, but maybe it could be a little wider. I see her cheekbone kind of coming in more like that. So maybe taking that gray tone and carrying it over a little bit further. It gets slightly darker as it approaches that pink tone. So yeah, just try moving that over just a little bit. But I think most of the area where you're going to see a lot of that cool kind of tone is right in here. It should go a little darker as that form rounds in anyway. So I think if you go in and you start to enhance some of the grays, I see you have a little bit of that in here. I think you could just push that maybe a little bit more. And then where it gets really close to her eyes, start to push it more into that deep kind of violet burgundy. I think you can carry that out just a little bit wider. And it kind of softens as it moves over to the right, where the light's coming from. Now her eyes are kind of deep set, and so what you have is it going from light on this side to being dark on this side of the form. So I think you're plenty light enough probably, but you might want to enhance the dark and go kind of cooler. So I know it looks deceptively warm, but if you push it a little cooler, and then there's a warm color kind of behind it as it transitions, it goes a little bit more, maybe more orange like what you have. And then actually you could probably go a little bit lighter. That color is actually kind of cool. So that might be what you need to do in this section right here, is just build that highlight a little cooler. Let's see what kind of difference that made. Yeah, so you can see how that's kind of balancing out some of that orange. She does have the orange kind of pick up again right in this corner after the eye. It's not so bright there. It kind of serves as a transition tone there. I like what you did with the eyeliner. I'm just looking at some of the shape there. I think this part of the eye could actually come down just a little bit. Yours seems to kind of carry over, maybe bring it, you take this dark color that you have, just carry that down and then let it fade off. I think it's because her eyelashes kind of come down. And then you do have a lost edge right in that inner corner, which is fine the way you have it. Her irises seem to be getting a little small, but you have a really nice color. But I think this side could just open up a little bit wider. And she does have a slight darker ring on this other side, which can help bring out some of that contrast in the eyes. And I do feel like the white of the eyes could be brighter on the right side. And you see how blue kind of cool that is? That's going to be also helpful. You do have that coolness, but I think maybe just bring it up a little bit, leave a little bit of your gray around that perimeter, and just lighten up through the center. Maybe carry it down just a little bit because she has that little highlight down towards the bottom. And you could probably just subtly lighten this side, but not nearly as much. And that gets her eyes to pop quite a bit. I think the same goes for this side of the eye. You can see how it takes on kind of a purple gray. So don't be afraid to start to push that contrast as that turns towards the shadow. And then it picks up again that warmth right through the middle. So, and I feel like you have that warmth, so maybe it's just a matter of cooling that other side. And maybe go more blue-gray dark, but maybe enhancing how cool that eyeliner is will help instead of just having it straight black. On that other side of the eye, you can see that purple tone as well. So don't be afraid to push that contrast there. It gets even darker right near, because this side kind of pushes into shadow. Her eyes are very striking. It's one of her most striking features. So I think if you really play up that element and push those complementary cool colors into these areas, it's going to enhance that. So I took a little bit of a violet there. And this little corner where you see that little light, it's not nearly as bright. So I know it feels really light, but maybe you could tone that down just a touch. We're pretty good in here. Maybe this color is just a little warm. Maybe make it cooler and slightly darker, with the exception of that darkest dark. Maybe keep that a little bit on the warmer side. And don't be afraid to push that a little bit darker even still. So these are just little tweaks I think this side, again, the iris has got maybe a touch small, so if you just went on the outside and just added a tiny bit of width there, I would actually go a little darker. She does have that green there, but just by having a touch, you don't have to have it like fully outlined, but if you add a little bit of that ring where it gets a little bit darker, it's going to help her eyes pop out a little bit more. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the lips here. So what I see is maybe that you need to go a little bit cooler of a pink instead of going a warmer pink, and go a little lighter so that you start to lose some of that edge. And it might also be that you just need to go in and re-wet that light next to the lip and just soften that edge out. And the same goes over the top here. And sometimes it's just a matter of going through and kind of slightly scumbling over that, because you want it to be visible. It's a visible line, but it's just generally a softer form. So you can have it somewhat defined, but even here you can see it's a little less defined. And I think in this lip on this side, if you went more of a violet, almost like what you're doing in the eyes, had it be a little cooler, and then the right side is a little bit more peachy and slightly warmer, it'll start to read, you have more of a saturated pink kind of serving as that transition. Yeah, even in here it gets, there's like this half tone that softens this edge out just slightly. Same goes for this bottom lip here. You do have it softer, but I would push it just a little bit further. And it even gets a little bit more lost right through here. It's not that there isn't a contrast there, but it's just an edge quality to make it push back a little bit more. If you went maybe more purple through this bottom shadow side of the lip, and then it gets more of a kind of a pink, intense pink up there. It's just finding those cool accents wherever you can. It might feel a little counterintuitive to use such a, a cool tone, but it's going to help balance out all those nice warm tones and actually make them feel warmer by contrast. And then same as what you did with the eyes, I would go a little bit, you don't want to go too light with the teeth, but maybe just a little bit cooler, and just do a thin scumble over, and that'll help build some of that contrast that you're wanting. So you don't have to go so dark with this line, but it can actually have a richness to its color. You have that nice rich red there, so maybe you just need something through here. And I would soften this out. I know she has that line there. Find a point where it maybe breaks, it softens. And you'll see when I go in and detail the lips with a second layer, actually even in the third layer, I go back in and add a few more accents, such as the brightest highlight. You can actually see that bright highlight's kind of a coolish pink. that can help it maybe pop out a little more for you. So if we just took, so you can kind of see when we take those away, how she feels kind of monochromatically warm. But you have her overall skin tone. But when we add some of those few areas where we kind of pulled more contrast and accented the cools and softened a few edges, it really helped to bring that finish to the portrait. So that's what I would suggest you concentrate on. Also the ear, don't be afraid to pull out maybe a little cadmium red with, you could use yellow ochre, or if you have a Naples yellow, try doing that and putting in that real chromatic transition in the ear. You'd be surprised at how much you can push those colors and it will still read. And the reason is the ears are kind of translucent and there's a lot of blood vessels in them, and so they tend to get really pretty saturated, especially around the edges. So yeah, just don't be afraid to push some of that. She has that really, really intense red-orange down here, and that's going to add, you never want to use like a cool dark tone, strangely enough, in the ear. You always want to keep it like a very hot tone. There are cool tones in the ears too, but typically you should have, you know, a dominant kind of warm tone. I'll fix that here. So yeah, try that a little bit and that will help as well. I think that's pretty much it. Do you have any questions? I think, you know, you're going to go in, you're going to go in and like detail areas like the hair and that sort of thing. I have a specific video on the hair that's going to be released next week. So kind of hold off on that because I think you have the overall colors. But I would concentrate on just building up those eyes. Also in the eyebrows, I think, you know, work on finding some kind of transition tone. You can even start to, you know, add a subtle kind of gray tone, a little bit softer and wider before you put those tiny, tiny hairs on. And that will help give her eyebrows a little bit more of a natural edge. They shouldn't really be hard almost anywhere. There's always going to be a slight softness around them, and then you can go in with the real small brush, like when you see me do the eyelashes in this weekend's lesson, and you can add those individual hairs that are real dark and add some of that. But then you always have this back tone, you know, pulling some of those broken edges, but you always have that back tone kind of that softens the overall effect. Does that make sense? Yeah, I think it's looking really good. Otherwise, yeah, just concentrate. I would say just concentrate on getting those eyes and that lip softened out. And then we'll kind of go from there. All right, really nice work. All right. Sorry, my dogs are barking at something. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Okay, sorry, I forgot to look at, okay, Angela. Are you here, Angela? You're welcome, Kathy. It's looking really nice. If you're here, Angela, just say hello. I did have a question. The picture felt a little bit warm, so I was just wanting to ask you if that's how it feels in real life. It feels also maybe a touch overexposed, so I'm going to play with some of the curves here and bring down some of that intensity to the brightness. I'm going to bring that down, something like that. Okay, so, oh, and then let me adjust some of the color here. Okay. All right, I'm going to just go based on that there. All right, so you have a nice, strong sense of contrast in your portrait, like the hair with the face, your overall values. I think there's a few things that could maybe soften back a little bit. One of them being the shapes within this shadow here. So the shape of that nose, I think if you went in and just go a little bit darker and knock this wing of the nostril into the shadow just a little bit more. I think the camera's making that look a little bit more green than it was. But also that cast shadow, even though it is a sharper shadow, notice how it has a slight fuzzy edge, especially the further out it gets from the source. It's always sharp in the beginning and then gets softer the further it gets from the source casting the shadow. So I would just go in and maybe create a half tone that comes out from that. It'll almost look like a little bit of a double shadow. It should be slightly lighter and definitely softer. And then you can go in and define that nostril. I would favor maybe a little bit more warmth in that shadow, the opening of the nostril. You can go quite dark with it, but make sure you keep it warm and don't just go with a, black, a dark blackish color. And that's going to help build some of that contrast as well. Let's see. I think this area feels just blown out in the picture over here. But if it is all light all the way across, try to find a few areas where you see more subtle shifts in the halftone. The brightest highlight really should be, and you'll see this in this weekend's lesson, is really kind of concentrated here. So if you feel like you can't go brighter in your portrait for those highlights without going, too white, then it might mean that you need to add a few halftones, build in a few, maybe pinks and yellows and peach tones to break up some of that kind of monotone large area. Even just scumbling in a little bit of that peach tone to break up that form has created a little more interest in that area. You might be a little yellow right through here, right in this section. Try cooling that color off just a little bit with maybe some alizarin and blue and white. Just a slight scumble over that area. And then work on the gradation out of that shadow so that way it doesn't transition so fast. So there should maybe be a cool tone that helps that transition there. And if your red is coming across really saturated, but it doesn't look that way, that red or hot of a red in real life, then don't worry about it, but you might try cooling that off just a little bit right through here, just where it transitions. I realize photographing is a bit of a challenge to get something that feels like how your painting feels in real life. And even I have a hard time between, video and capturing stills for you guys. Sometimes one favors the other just slightly. But in reality, when you look at a painting in person, you can usually see all of those effects. You can see the warms and the cools and everything kind of playing, because paintings are more complex in the sense that we're painting in layers. So all of those underneath layers are actually coming through and influencing the upper layers. And this weekend we do glazing, which you'll notice as I apply the glaze, it warms the entire portrait, and then I go back in and add my cooler highlights and kind of work back into that. So it's creating this, depth to the skin tone through all these different layers that are kind of coming through, and we're seeing it. But a camera tends to take all that and compress it and kind of simplify it. So sometimes that can make it a little tricky. It either likes to favor the shadows or it favors the lights, and that can make it a little hard. But hopefully that app, and I posted in the forum, for those of you who have an Android phone, I posted a link to an equivalent app that works very similar. It has the white balance and the exposure, aperture control, and I don't know if it has the anti-shake, which is kind of a handy part, but it has it has the grids and all of that, so you should be able to still capture a better picture using that. I don't know why they don't just integrate those features into the regular cameras, because they have the ability to do that. It's just, they like to keep things, I guess, more simple. And I have a suspicion that a lot of, our eyes like contrast, and the way they design the cameras on the phones is to make portraits of people look better, like taking a snapshot. So it tends to favor things a little bit, even if you turn on the HDR setting. It just, for some reason, it doesn't work the best for paintings. But I find that these apps give me just a little more control. It's not the same as pulling out a DSLR, which tends to, has a bigger sensor, and it's going to be able to capture more accurately. And that's what I use when I photograph my work for, my website and that sort of thing. Okay, so, sorry, got a little off topic there. So here in the lips too, I think you could push it a little cooler. So instead of going real kind of, this almost strikes me as like a cadmium red dominant color, I would go in with maybe a little more of like an alizarin in white when you go in to lighten up and highlight the lips, and just start to build. It's okay to have some of that warmth, that real rich saturated cadmium feeling through here, but wherever you see the lights come through and hit on the lips, make it a little cooler, and that's going to help build some of that contrast in your color variety. And the same goes in this part of the cheek. I think you have some of it, maybe the camera's just not picking it up, but don't be afraid to put in some cooler pinks intermingling with this warmer tone, and it will help add a little more variety to that color there. And same thing with the top of the nose here, going just a little bit more color. You'd be surprised at how much color exists in the nose when you really, really look. And a little note on that, I wanted to tell a story about, because I had one of you write and say, I can't see these colors, and I'm kind of struggling. When I was taking a class with Adrian, he kept telling me, because we were painting under a very warm light on the model, and the model actually had kind of she was kind of had Mediterranean warm kind of skin tones, and very olive skin tone, and Adrian kept saying, look for the cool tones in her skin, the violets, the purples, they're there. And I'm like looking at her and I'm like, I just see orange. Like, those are the only colors I can see. And it was frustrating as a student to not be able to see it. Even though I knew he was right, because he'd put them in his painting and they would work, so I knew they were there. It's just I had a hard time seeing it on her. And it just goes to show you that half of learning to paint is learning to see. Learning how to look at your subject, learning about these nuances, and what to look for. And so long as you keep them in your mind, and you keep looking and looking and looking, you know, you'll start to see them. And sometimes you'll have an encounter with a model where those colors are really obvious, and others where they're more subtle, but you'll be able to see it if you know what to look for. And it's kind of just like training your eye to that sensitivity. And it wasn't until I was off painting in my studio, I think it was about a year later, a couple months later, and I was working on a portrait, and I suddenly started to see all of them, and I'm like, that's what he was talking about. I was, you know, I just had a hard time seeing it in the beginning. So if your eye isn't that attuned, that's okay. Just know what to look for. Pay attention to these areas that I keep pointing out, like, you know, finding those cool zones, finding, you know, looking around the eyes where the skin gets thinner, you know, paying attention to these areas, and then you will develop that sensitive eye and be able to enhance it in your portrait. I'm not copying the photo. You guys have probably noticed. I take quite a few liberties when I work. I push color, and that's just part of my own personal style. And it's, you know, just kind of how I've developed my technique over time. But, you know, if you're having a hard time seeing it, it's okay. Just keep practicing, keep looking for it, keep those color zones in mind, and experiment with painting models of different skin tones and of different, under different sources of light, and you will start to see some of these things that I'm talking about. There are no absolute rules in painting, but there are guidelines. And those guidelines can be kind of broken, but in the beginning you just need to learn them and, you know, kind of know what to look for and teach yourself how to see them. So don't get discouraged. It happens to all of us. We all go through this stage where we're frustrated and we can't see it. Okay, so back to the lips. I think as you continue to develop, don't be afraid to put on some of those nice sharp highlights that she has. She has that one down toward the bottom. And of course you'll go in and place those in the nose as well. But I think that's pretty much it. I think it's more a matter for your portrait of getting some of these cooler tones to complement some of that warmth that I'm seeing. Another area where I think you could probably push that is maybe this lavender tone that you see under her eye. Try finding where you can maybe push it a little cooler. And she has this kind of bluish gray, and even kind of some, I used kind of a turquoise in mine, but try enhancing some of those areas and start building up some of those forms. Her eye might have gotten a little round on this edge here. So just bring your light down and just flatten that shape out just a little bit. Don't move where you have the peak. I think that's okay. But just push that down a little bit and give her more of that upper lid. And you could probably go more of a cool alizarin berry tone rather than an orange. Oops. In this area here. And probably on this inner corner wherever you need to accent that dark. But she does have more of a lost edge on this inner corner. There's a couple of little bits of light that kind of carry into that tear duct membrane. So don't be afraid to soften out some of those edges as well. Other than that, this looks really good. I think continuing to soften edges and pay attention to a few of these areas, like right here in the lips, where there's the darker halftone that kind of comes in, and you don't have this real dark line there. I mean, it starts off in this corner, but you can see how it softens up as it moves away from that corner. So maybe work on building more halftone in this side of the muzzle. Yeah, I'm not seeing much else other than just going through and continuing to refine your layer. If you have any follow-up questions, since you're not in here, just post it in the forum as you continue to work on your painting. But good job. All right, and Susan, I saw that you're in here, so hello. I got your email, so if you want to send me your, because you finished it last night, you said pretty late, so just send it in or post it in the forum if you want some feedback as you continue to work. You could also email it to me if you want a paint over. It won't be live, but I can write down some notes and do a quick paint over for you. Okay, Beth. Are you in here, Beth? So this is also something I wanted to mention to everyone for next week. When you submit, try submitting both a close-up and a kind of a distant picture. Hi, Beth. Okay, so having that close-up, you can see how much more detail I can see. And since we're really concentrated on the portrait for this stage, try sending in for next week, next week's critique, a close-up of the face, something kind of like this. It doesn't have to be real, zoomed in, but something that captures a little bit more so I can see some of your transitions and that sort of thing. So Beth, I wanted to ask you just really quickly, so does this picture feel more like how your painting feels in real life? In temperature, color-wise, and also value. Does it feel a little bright or a little dark? It's close. Okay, good, good. All right. I'm going to go ahead and zoom this in too. Okay. So I think what I'd like you to concentrate on is focusing on a couple of edges. So transitioning some of your edges. A good example would be like the edges around the lips. They feel a little hard. It's a little brighter than your painting. All right, let me bring that down just a little bit. Did that help? Yeah, I can see a lot of the detail. Okay, good, good. Okay, so so yeah, my suggestion would be to work on a couple of the edges. Like a good one is, for example, the one around the mouth right here. Notice that the muzzle color is a little bit cooler, and it helps to kind of soften that transition into the lip. It starts off a little bit darker towards this corner, and gets lighter as it kind of transitions out. It could be also that you maybe got a little bit light on this outer edge here just in general. So don't be afraid to start to push that a little bit darker. So if you have like this color, maybe bring it down more into this range. She has that little speck of light there, and it feels light because it's next to so much dark, but I think to get that to round back, I think you definitely want to start to push that value a little bit deeper. I would also go back in and maybe work on reshaping some of the depth of your form shadow. I do feel like I can see the green here, and then I can see this warm, and I feel like the warm got pushed a little narrow, especially where she has that kind of reflected shadow. So I would pull this out and make that just a little more solid of a color and also a more clear shape. You could definitely warm that up. Try using a little bit of burnt sienna with a touch of blue, and that should, it's a little more opaque, so it's going to help give you some of that richness to the red. And then you'll want to create a little bit more of that mauve halftone for up here, which will transition into the pink that you have there, which is a nice pink. I think you have a good color there. And then as it comes down, it becomes more maybe of a neutral gray-green. But maybe your color was too green. I would just neutralize it a little bit. That looks rather purple. She does have kind of that greenish color in here, though. Maybe I'll find something closer to what you had. Yeah, something like that's good. And her core shadow is probably just a touch darker. So after you block in with that warmer tone and widen that shadow, you can go in with your darker core shadow and just kind of blend into that. It doesn't need to be real heavy. Just a subtle kind of gradation to that shadow. And you can see how just adding some strength to that shadow is really going to help the contrast for the lights. And I would say the same for your shadow on the nose. Try warming it up a little bit. Go in with the same, it'll be the darker kind of color for the cast shadow, but go in a little warmer. And then that underplane to the nose on the shadow side could be a little bit more of that reflected light color, a little bit more of the burnt sienna. And definitely, she has that rich shadow kind of carrying up into the brow. So I think just make that a little more of a solid shape and not as broken in terms of edges. And then you'll probably end up reworking some of these transitions here. And just in general, remember that the left side is much brighter than the right side of the face. Even the brightest highlights here are kind of in this range, and the average light over here is in this range. There's a difference between those two values. So maybe keep this one a little cooler and not quite as bright. And that could be just the exposure that you're getting in the photo. So if that feels a little bit darker, yeah, you'll find yourself going in maybe more with some of these kind of mauve-y, cool halftones too, and less of the yellow on this shadowy side, because we get a lot of cools in those transitions. You have a nice red here, so don't be afraid to keep some of that in there as well. Maybe that lighter pink can kind of connect to that one there. It's a very delicate area on the face. Another thing is, as this form rolls back, you can see that once it gets kind of back in here, it goes quite a bit darker. And it just slowly transitions back to that. Even the color that is right next to that cast shadow from the eyelash, it's a kind of a cooler, darker violet color. So maybe just, I think most of your work is going to be on this right hand side of the face to really push that. Our contrast is pretty relative. Trying to find that peach color that you have there. That's so nice. So when we build, a lot of light everywhere, it kind of feels washed out. So if you want to make it feel more balanced and really have that nuanced transition across the forehead and across the features, and really get that sense of that fall off of light, you know, the light's hitting the strongest up here and then falling off as it goes diagonal, then you need to really work on building more deep midtones and reserve those nice highlights, those lights for those really select areas. And it might help you to see what I do in this next lesson, even though you're not going to be doing a lot of those eyelash details just yet. It might help you to see how it all kind of pulls together in the end. So same goes for this edge here. Just find some of those cooler halftones. And then this shadow color, this rich one, make sure it goes nice and warm, and carry it up that edge too. She gets a lot of that reflection down in here as well. Her chin might be a touch large. So when you go in with that shadow color, maybe bring that up just a tiny bit. It's not by very much. And then when you come into the lips here, I would make a little bit of a softer edge along that bottom, but also her lip, you have it very rounded, and hers is a little more flat across that bottom. Even though her lip is quite full, I think if you just brought your shadow shape up where it's almost more level with these corners of the mouth, it'll start to feel a little more like her, and you can again start to push these contrasts on the shadowy side of the lips a little bit darker, and that will help to round out the lip. The lights on the chin should not be as bright as what you get in the forehead. So again, just continue to build. As you move along this edge, you're going to repaint some of these transitions. So just pay attention to how bright some of those areas are. The brightest point on her chin is just that specular highlight. It's like right there, but you can see it has more color to it. It's also kind of a pink. But you'll go in first with those more midtones, and that might help just in general building more dark midtones around that highlight on the chin, and then maybe you don't need to brighten up the chin value or for that highlight. Pretty much that is my main suggestion. This shape here could probably come in just a little bit. Soft edge on it, but I think that shape kind of dances into the form a little bit more. And don't be afraid to add more kind of halftones and transitions on that bridge of the nose too. Pick up a little bit more warmth in that color. Just a few tiles you can see of, you know, transition tones helps that nose feel more dimensional. Do you have any questions? I think if you start with that shadow side and start to work your way over, you'll find yourself making adjustments even in the eyes, because you're going to be making these areas darker, so you might find yourself needing to make this area darker and that sort of thing. So do you have any questions about what we went over? What do I do to keep dust off my painting? If you notice some of the close-ups, there's quite a bit of dust in my painting. It's just part of working, and it tends to show up more on panel. But I do talk about how to scrape off like large flecks of dust if it bothers you, because you can always go in and kind of retouch those areas. But generally, I store my paintings in a drying cabinet that has doors, closed doors on it. And I just stick my painting in there while it's wet, and I don't keep it out on my easel. The only thing is I've kept this painting for the demo out on my easel this whole time because I don't want to move and reset up the camera every time. So I do have a little bit more dust on it. If something is, if a big piece of paint or dust is in a really important area that's like distracting, like the eye or, I think I have one right in the dark of the nostril that I'm probably going to scrape off and then retouch. That's something you can do with a palette knife. Another thing you can do is store your paintings. If you have like wall shelves, or if you seen those bookshelves that have like the lip on them, then you can lean your painting facing the wall, so the wet side of your painting leans against the wall, of course not touching the wall except for the very top edge, and that can help keep the dust from settling on it as well. Yeah. Like I said, sometimes dust just happens. I don't tend to have fans blowing around when I'm working either. Another thing that could be happening is if you're leaving your palette sitting out, your painting palette, dust could be settling into your paint mixtures. So I have like a little Tupperware lid container that I stick my palette colors into, or I just lay it over, like lay the opening of the container over my colors, and it prevents dust from kind of settling on them if I'm going to be out of the studio for a day or two. But the biggest problem is dust kind of just falls, out of the sky, out of the air. So if you face your painting towards the wall and kind of lean it, it won't tend to fall on the face of the painting. Oh, okay, so it's probably not in your palette then. It's probably just sticking. The paintings are wet too, so they're like a magnet for dust. The other day I had a bug, just like a tiny little gnat, fly right into my wet paint, right in the middle of the face. And I had to try and like pick them out with the palette knife. So sometimes these things happen. That's why I'm not a big plein air painter. I've had too many accidents out painting outdoors, dropping my painting face down in the dirt, you name it, it's happened to me. So, all right. So, if you have any other questions, just go ahead and type them in, or if you have questions as you're working on this second layer, just post it in our forum and let me know. All right, Susan, are you in here? I think your painting feels a little pink, and I'm thinking it's the picture. So I'm going to adjust some of the color balance here. So I just want to ask you, since you are in here, is your painting this pink in person, or is this looking a little more balanced to you? I'm thinking it's somewhere probably around here. Does that look okay to you? Okay, good. All right, so yeah, you have a really beautiful start here. I think what I'd like to see you do is work on maybe you have a lot of that pink. The left forehead is a little bright. Okay, let me see if I can bring that down. bring down that highlight just a touch. Okay. Okay, so what I think you could probably work on is balancing out some of that pink with maybe a few more neutrals. One area I see some of that, maybe something more gray, is down in this section here. Let me grab the right brush here. Okay. So yeah, going in here maybe and introducing a little bit of maybe a cool, you have some cool tones down here. Maybe it just needs to carry up a little bit and be a little more of a mid-tone. Maybe bring the value down because everything feels kind of somewhat evenly lit. It does get lighter as it kind of comes up into that cheek too. So it's like kind of gradual transition there. And generally, and you'll probably notice this in the demo that I just posted, we kind of go dark to light. So if you start off too light, then you won't have an opportunity to kind of bring those values up with each layer. So maybe pay attention to some of those areas. So if your forehead feels all uniformly really, really bright, I know you said the picture's a little bright, but if like this area really does feel kind of uniformly as bright as you can get your color to go, then you might actually find yourself needing to add a few halftones in some of these areas to break up that form, so that way when you do put on those nice brilliant highlights, they pop out a little bit more. In one area I think you could probably cool off your tone is probably under the eye here. It feels a little too hot of a pink, so maybe try taking that pink that you were using and throw a little bit of blue in it with a touch of white to make it more of a violet. And then where it goes real dark, you can see it's kind of a mauve tone. And it does have a richness to it, but I think maybe you went a little too far with the red. That helps to balance it out. And they have a lot of nice cool tones in, she has a lot of cool tones in this area. You have the kind of pink and purple balanced out, so maybe try finding where you can introduce some of that blue-green, just in a few select areas. She has kind of that, if you look in here, this section, right, like kind of right in this area. I should grab a different brush here. You can kind of see this section has a little bit more of that bluer quality rather than a kind of a pink. And if you kind of find areas where you can push that, let me find a color here. I used kind of a turquoise blue so it didn't blend in too much with the other colors, like the purples. But you could go in and just build a subtle kind of area there. And find other areas where you tend to see some of those colors. You actually have a nice amount of that kind of green gray in the right side of the portrait. Oh, okay, the video looked, that could be the monitor that you're maybe watching the video on. It could be enhancing some of the red in the video. I do know that my video captures a little bit more of the red, especially after I glaze. But that's why I included a couple of pictures, close-ups of my painting as well with this week's lesson, so that you can see actually how much cool I have in there as well. But yeah, I think you could go in and start to enhance some of these areas when you move into those kind of final layers. like when you go in and brighten up some of those spots, having some of that blue-gray helps to balance things out. Like I said, I've posted a couple of pictures, so you might take a look at some of those too. And I want you don't worry about copying what I'm doing in the video necessarily. Try to look and see some of these colors and variations in the photo, that in the photo reference. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. You have a lot of that. So those are some of the changes I suggest. You will be building up more lights in the lips, so just keep that in mind. Look for where you can soften out edges and maybe brighten some of the tones for the lip to get things to pop. And you might push this just a little. It's maybe a touch warm. Maybe go in with something similar to what you use in the jaw there. And just scumble a little. You don't have to completely make it gray, just break up some of that warmth that you see in the neck. Something like that. And I think you're ready to kind of keep moving forward with your detail layers, like the eyelashes and that sort of thing. Do you have any questions? Okay, so you haven't done a second layer on the nose and mouth. So yeah, you could proceed with that. The nose looks pretty good, apart from some of the highlights, and then going into this shadow and building maybe more of that chromatic warmth. This nose could, that side could stand a little bit of that to enhance some of the color. Maybe even just warming up the tip of that nose just a touch to get it to come forward. The right cheek, I think your colors look pretty good. You're probably going to want to revisit and just soften some of these areas, like that transition there, instead of having such a hard line. And then you'll see me go in and build subtle enhancements, like in here, building a small amount of light. You could probably push the area adjacent to the lips just a little darker as it pushes into that corner. And maybe not quite as pink right through here. Maybe go a little more cool and neutral. She has a little bit of pink in that chin, but it's maybe not that hot of a color. And it's kind of more broken up. So maybe try scumbling a little bit of that over it, and then you're going to have more of the pink kind of to the left side of that chin. In your other question, cheek shadow looks larger in the photo compared to your painting. I think it's that you have it more rounded. And maybe a little dark. I think it would help to bring a little more reflected light into this area. I didn't need to do that in mine because my color was a little bit more red to begin with and a little lighter. I kind of waited to put more reflected light in, but if your painting is that dark in this shadow here, as it's showing in the picture, then you might consider taking a little bit of don't go too bright, but burnt sienna and a little bit of white, and then scumble into these areas where it needs to be a little bit more luminous. And then here, I think it's just that this got maybe too round, so don't be afraid to add maybe a slight more angular edge there. And if you repaint that, you're going to probably have to redo some of the transitions in that lower part of the cheek. yeah, adding that luminosity. Plus, it clarifies where this part is. So, you know, when I go into my painting and I'm working on the hair, my hair wasn't dark enough. So I, instead of adding reflected light in my painting, I actually just darkened behind the hair or in the hair area, and it made the jawline pop out. But my painting was a little bit lighter than it seems like yours is. So I would just do something like that. The pupils, um, they look okay. I think maybe work on creating some softer edges, especially as this part comes up. You probably have this too light towards the top. Go just a little bit darker and make sure that the edges for your pupil are a little bit more soft. I have, like I said, look at those close-ups of the eye um, that I've included in this week's lesson, and you'll be able to see some of that subtlety in that in the pupil and the iris that I created towards the top there. Yeah, I think it looks fine. I would just look for those soft edges, because if you make the pupils really hard and sharp everywhere, they look kind of weird. So you'll want to, you know, create some areas or find areas where the shadow kind of obscures where you can see the pupil, and usually there's a slight transition leading out. Um, and I like the emerald color that you have in here. Maybe just work on, it should be a little lighter opposite of your highlight. So you have your highlight here, so opposite should be more illuminated, and a little darker right next to the highlight, which helps it to kind of pop out. I would just make them a little bit softer. You couldn't create a darker black. I don't think they need to be darker. Let me look again though. Yeah, no, I think they're fine. They're plenty dark. If you're having trouble, one thing you could try doing is taking, I don't know what other colors you might have, but one color that makes a really nice black is phthalo green and alizarin crimson. If you mix those two together, you'll get a very dark black. So if you feel like you need to go even darker, then you can do that. But you could be feeling that this isn't dark enough because your hair and your jaw was so dark before. So before you mess with the pupils, go in and lighten up this area first, because this area is so dark that it could be making the pupils not have enough impact in terms of relationship to, you know, the pupils are really the only pure black that you should have anywhere in your portrait. So with maybe the exception of the hair in a few select areas, but everything else, you know, if you have black here and black here and black here, you know, it's going to kind of make the pupils here not feel like they have enough impact. So try, I think the biggest thing is adding that nice, warmer, reflected light in that shadow. And that's going to bring more contrast to the eyes. The right pupil should be darker than the left. Maybe slightly, but you know, I made her pupils smaller in my painting on purpose because I felt like they feel a little bit open here. What you could be sensing in this area though is, see how up in here we can still see some of, you know, this part of the pupil up at the top, but on this side it kind of disappears into the dark a little more. You could try playing with that a little bit, and you probably need to go a little darker on this part of underneath the eye. maybe push that a little bit darker too, and that's going to help bring more contrast to that right eye. I would try those first, but again, go into that reflected light first. And you could probably stand to make them maybe a little more contrast in the lips here. Or maybe it doesn't need to be go darker, but you need to clarify that shadow shape and go a little darker on the right side of the mouth too. Just slightly. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Good, good. All right. So I'll send these edits to you, the paint over and the suggestions after the class. You're very, very welcome. Nice work. Don't be afraid to get a little thicker paint on there too. It almost looks a little thin. When you start to build up more lights, start to use a little bit heavier paint, and that's going to help enhance that three-dimensional quality. And if you're working on canvas as opposed to panel, sometimes you have to put it on even bigger, like a little more bold, because canvas tends to, make your brush strokes disappear. We all are. We all tend to be very timid with paint in the beginning. One thing that helped me with that was switching to working on panel instead of canvas. Because it has a tendency, because of the smoother surface, it has a tendency to maintain your brushwork a little bit more. And I always liked that texture when I'd see it in like Dutch paintings, but I never knew how to achieve it. And I wasn't really able to until I switched from working on canvas to panel. And it takes some adjusting, getting used to working on that slick surface. But it totally changed the way I paint and kind of the effects that I can get. I was trying to get those effects on canvas and I just couldn't. Okay, so sorry, I keep forgetting to look at the name. Here we go. Kelly. Are you here, Kelly? Yeah, the canvas does absorb more paint than panel. Some panel can be absorbent too. It depends on if you're working on traditional gesso or if you're working on an oil primed canvas panel. You can get really, really fine linen. Trekell offers one linen panel where they mount the linen to a board, you can get it on wood or the aluminum composite. But it is linen, but it's like triple or quadruple primed, a lead primed linen, and that is smooth, smooth, smooth. It's really lovely to work on. So you might try getting one of those small ones and just feel the difference, because it's more of the weave of the canvas is filled in by how many layers of primer they've applied. And also linen just has a finer texture than traditional cotton canvas. So if you like the texture of canvas and you like working on it, but you want it just a little bit smoother, try that one. You might like it a little more. And if you are interested in stretching your own canvas, but you want a smoother one, try going with Fredrix. I used to use this when I was painting on canvas. I'll have to write it down because the spelling is really weird. So it's, oops. So it's Fredrix, just standard Fredrix brand. You buy it in the roll. It's relatively affordable. You get a huge roll for $50 or something. And it's the Knickerbocker. I think that's how it's spelled. And if you look at it, it's already primed. It's a thinner canvas and it's much smoother. Very, very, very fine texture. So if you like to stretch your own canvas, but you like that smoother texture and you don't want to work on panel, then you could try something like that. Hi, Diane. Welcome. Oh, so you have us on the big screen TV. I hope the resolution is holding up okay for the live stream that large. But that sounds cozy. You're like comfy on the couch while you're watching. Okay. Um, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about your portrait, Kelly. All right. So I just wanted, since you're not in here, I was going to ask if you felt like this picture was a little warm. I'm going to go ahead and bring a little more balance to the color here. And that's just something that, you know, we're working not only from different monitors, we're all looking at, you know, this on different monitors. And every camera picks up different colors, so we have to kind of get around some of these digital hoops. Okay, I think that looks a little more balanced. So, you know, for those of you who are watching the videos and all you can see are warm tones, try watching my instructional videos on maybe a different device, because it can vary a lot. Or you can take your monitor, and if you know how to adjust the temperature control on it, you can try taking out some of the yellow and cooling off the monitor a little bit. That can make a big difference for how you're viewing the instructional videos as well. There's always going to be some little slight variation, but that's again why I included some of those close-ups of the painting too, photographs. Okay, so I think for your portrait, you might want to start to enhance some of the cooler pinks that we see. I see you have some of those nice grays and greens right through here, but I think what would help enhance that even further is to take a cooler pink to the lips here. Instead of going kind of brown. And don't be afraid to push the red in those darks for the lips, because that's really what gives the lips that feeling of that rich chroma. So going in, and you can see how purple that feels compared to the warmth in your portrait. I think what I'll do is pull a few colors that you have in here, because that could just be the photograph. Of your painting and not your painting in real life. But yeah, start to enhance some of those pinks. Maybe I'll go just a little more chromatic to balance out, to accommodate what's happening in the picture here. So keep that in mind as you work, but start to enhance some of those lighter, cooler tones. I feel like you have them elsewhere in your portrait, but you could probably enhance it in the mouth a little bit, and I'm going to have to redo that because I didn't do that on a new layer. Oops. Okay. Let's start over with that. So going in with that rich kind of berry color for the shadow. Don't be afraid to push that contrast. and build some of that rich pink that you see in the lips there. And look for some of those lost edges that also occur in the lips. And you can see that that's already adding a nice kind of intensity. And it looks like the nose probably could use a little more color too, partly in the warmth of the shadow. Maybe some of the contrast can get pushed a little bit more. But also where it transitions, you have all these warm kind of peachy tones. You definitely want to incorporate some of that, more of that into the nose. And maybe even look for where you can introduce a little more pink. And maybe some of that gray transition up here towards the top. Yeah, you can see that's already helping to build more color variety into the portrait. All right, so some of the shadows here feel maybe a little yellow. Maybe incorporate some of these peach tones into the main body of the chin, and then more of these kind of beautiful green grays that you have. Enhance some of that over here. And those colors are going to play off of one another nicely. You might be a little light in this area, so start to look at where you can build maybe more softness to those transitions by going darker with the halftone. And that's often what we tend to do, is we're afraid to go dark enough with those halftones. I'm just covering this up so I can see the color a little more accurately without the glare of the canvas. Yeah, that's reading well. So yeah, don't be afraid to push those halftones. And then watch for edges like here, where you have this sudden jump into that dark tone. First off, I think that shape can open up a little wider here at the top. And then make it not quite as bright as it pulls back into that shape. She does have a little more light here, but it shouldn't be competing with the lights on the left side of the face. And you can see it's quite a bit cooler too. Maybe some of these tones could go a little bit, maybe not as hot. Maybe try introducing just a touch of blue into those pinks. Now, if she was under a really warm light, we would have more of those red oranges, but she's under kind of a cool light source, and her skin tones she's pretty fair, so her skin tones are kind of picking up the environment, so that you get a lot of these mauve-y tones kind of influencing what you see there in the flesh tones. And of course, as you kind of continue around, you're going to want to make, pay attention to some of those more nuanced edges. It doesn't have to be that dark, but as it kind of creeps down into that corner of the mouth, that's going to help. And you can see already just doing that section has created more volume to the portrait. She might be getting a little narrow through the forehead right here. There's a little bit more of a kind of a dance to the shape. Like in this area, this kind of opens up before the hair. So maybe open that up a little bit wider. And build more mid-tones across that forehead. It's probably getting too bright in this area too quickly. If we look at the color in that area, it's a little bit more in this value range. And that could be this picture just blowing out a little bit in the photo, but pay attention to your painting in those areas and see if that helps. You could probably use more contrast as you move into the eyes as well. So don't be afraid to enhance some of this dark on this right eye. But be careful not to pinch off her lid too much. Contrast goes a long way, especially on these halftones. If we don't have enough depth to the halftones, the image starts to fall flat. So that's something I think you should concentrate on. I think you're plenty bright enough, but maybe work on more of these transitions on the right side of the face. Her neck might be a touch wide here too, just looking at the drawing. Maybe bring it in. Not where it transitions to the jaw's plenty wide enough and it seems fine, but maybe just cut that in just a little bit more. All right, so if you have any follow-up questions, just let me know, and you can post them in the forum, and I'll try to answer them best I can. All right. Great work. All right, so Linda, you are up. Are you still in here, Linda? I was noticing that your portrait feels very warm, and I think it's just the picture. So just go ahead and let me know. I'm going to kind of pull up the color balance here. I feel like the shadows had too much red in them. That was probably fine. The yellow seem okay? How does that look to you? Is that a little closer to how your painting feels? And maybe with the midtones, are they just a little bit darker? Or was it pretty much as light as what it appears? Tell me if that looks good to you. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, you have a nice variety of colors happening here. I think what we want to do is it too chromatic? I can decrease that chroma a little bit. Let me know how that is. So what I think you'll probably want to do is start to work on building some more of the darker values along the right side of the face. I think you have plenty of light on this left side. And mostly what I'm seeing is an edge thing with the cheek shadow. So maybe work on taking kind of a cool pink. It's almost like a mauve violet tone in here, and start to glaze some of that in. And you can paint it in semi-opaque as well. Just use the same technique that we've been doing, where you oil it out and just start to build a little bit more in there. It goes a little darker gray, kind of with a tint of greenish. And I see some of that in here, but maybe just start to carry over more of that mid-tone. into some of these areas. You actually have a really nice color here that would work for it. I think maybe just push it a little darker. Right where it meets that edge. And this color is probably maybe too orange, and I don't know if it's oh, you're saying it is that chromatic. Sorry, I just saw that. I'll bring that back up. Okay, so I think this is probably maybe too yellow for that area. It's probably a little more of a cool pink or a peach tone. So I would start to cool some of that off in here. I think you have a really nice pink right here. That works really well, so you could even carry some of that up and find where it helps to transition from the nose. And even that color can go just a little darker, and it helps to soften that edge for the cast shadow. Your cast shadow seems dark enough, but maybe you could introduce some of this red brown that you have in your shadow over here and just give it a little more chroma. And don't be afraid to kind of even glaze this down to knock that darker shadow and kind of unify that shadow for the nostril. So you're asking, am I getting the darker gray mauve tones from alizarin blue and white? Yes, but if it's too chromatic when you're making that color, then you want to add the complementary color, which, you know, alizarin blue and white makes a purple. So add yellow ochre. So if you add yellow ochre to that, it's going to gray it out to what you need. And like down here, you would have more of the blue and maybe a touch of, you know, the alizarin, but it'll be more blue gray dominant, whereas up here it'll be more red dominant. Yeah, chroma is fine so long as it's in the right spots, you know. And if you have it kind of spotted everywhere, then you have to find areas where maybe you want to neutralize and balance it out. It's always about finding that nice sense of balance for the painting. Her chin is getting a little off center, I'm thinking, like where you have this kind of dip. It should be, this should sit in line with her lips. It could be that her lips are also off center slightly. Let me check a few things real quick. There's a slight tilt to those relationships. And you have that definitely maybe too extreme. I think your lips are actually really close to being in line. I'm looking at that relative tilt there. So maybe bring this over a little bit. This one's probably fine. But then this line, this peak here, should be here. And I think where you have this line is fine. So I think you just need to kind of round that out here. And then maybe have the little overlap in her other part of the chin right there. These shapes move around on us sometimes. Okay, so I think that shows a nice kind of difference in terms of tonality. I think her eyes are maybe a little warm. So I would work with some of these cooler mauve and peach tones in the eyes as well. They got a little hot of a color right here. That could be part of your underpainting influencing that too. So try going in with more of that soft mauve tone, especially in that dark, and then as it moves over, you can go more into maybe the more neutral pink and peach tones, like something like that. And then in her upper lid, it goes very kind of gray up in here, almost the colors you have up here in the forehead, just slightly darker. And it goes kind of cooler as it fades off into this corner here. So it gradually disappears. This line here might be able to trim down just a little bit. Where you have the fullness here in the start of the crease is good, but I would go in and maybe start to cut in just a little bit, maybe right around there. I wouldn't go that purple. I don't know why it picked up that color. I would go more red and darker. And don't be afraid to carry some of this nice warm tone that you have up into here, because this is part of the shadow. There is some of that green in the transition, but I think if you brought in some of that warm, especially right where this crease is, that's going to add some more dimension to the eyes. So you haven't redone the eye. Oh, okay. So I'm sorry, I just saw that you said you haven't redone the eyes or lips. So just keep these things in mind then when you go in with your second pass. I think that will help a lot. Same thing up in this forehead. I think you have actually a really good color right here. Maybe you just need something a little bit more like this color, but slightly darker to go next to that green instead. And it does get more of that gray-green color that you have near the hairline. So I think just pushing your midtones over just slightly. You have a nice variety of color in here though. I like the play of the blue and the yellow and the pink. You just might want to look at smoothing out some of those transitions. Like in here, maybe that's too yellow, so you can smooth out that transition in the next layer by scumbling a little bit of a pink and peach tone over it at the top. And then as you bring up this cool gray, overlap a little bit into it, you're going to get a nice kind of greenish shade of halftone, and you're just applying that scumble, and it will help to soften and smooth out some of those more gradual transitions so that they're not so abrupt. She's a little lighter in here. I made that too dark. Okay. Yeah, so just when you're moving into your second pass, pay attention to some of those cooler tones, and then same thing in the nose. You probably haven't gotten to that either. Look for those pink tones in that nose. Do you have any questions? I'll try and send over your guys' edits right after this class instead of waiting until the end of the day. I just have a short break between now and the next critique, so but I should be able to get those to you right now, so that way you guys can keep working today. Yeah, more pinks in the nose, like usually where you see them, it usually picks up kind of like a hint of red, is just in this transition right here. Like instead of going from that gray straight to the lightest color, try adding just a hint of red or pink right in here, and it's going to help pop that nose forward a little bit more. And then you'll want to make some of these areas up here, this yellow, maybe just a little bit more subtle in the way I showed you, like to do right here. Sometimes it's just a matter of taking kind of like a neutral or cooler skin tone and just slightly scumbling so you have some of the yellow peeking through, but it kind of breaks it up so it's not so strong. Alrighty, if you don't have any other questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I think everyone's doing a great job, so for next week, if you are still catching up, just get as far as you can. Like I said, everyone's going to at different stages right now, so don't stress out about keeping up with what the lessons are teaching. So like this weekend, I did do the final detail layer. Don't worry if you don't have to have that by next weekend. Just get that second color pass done and get it as far along as you can. And if you guys have questions midweek or you're stuck on something, just post it in the forum and I'll try to answer back as quick as possible so that you guys can keep making progress on your portraits. And remember, next weekend, send me a close-up of the face and the overall picture. But the close-up is a little easier to work from. So if you guys just take a picture of, make sure the whole chin to forehead or neck, area is in the picture, that's perfect. All right, does anyone else have any last-minute questions before we sign off? All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing all of your work. Everyone's doing a fantastic job, and if you guys, again, are feeling stuck, just reach out to me in the forum. All right, thanks, guys. Have a good Saturday.